What is the Rio Grande Valley? Deep along the southern tip of Texas, off the coast of the Gulf of Mexico and the United States and Mexico national border, sits about 4,872 square miles of flatlands, crops, fields, and ranches that collectively make the Rio Grande Valley. But what do outsiders know about the valley?
Do you know what the Rio Grande Valley is?
What?
Do you know what the Rio Grande Valley is?
No.
Miss, do you know what the Rio Grande Valley is?
No.
Excuse me, ma'am, do you know what the Rio Grande Valley is?
No.
Obviously, the valley is not widely known, but what would a fellow Texan know about El Rio Grande Valle?
My name is Eduardo Hernandez. I'm from Houston, Texas. At the valley. Let's see. I really like going down there. I have some family members that live in the valley, and I think there's a large sense of community there, and it's a very positive thing about the valley.
Even from fellow Texans, the valley is not as popular, but the Rio Grande Valley is still rich in culture and traditions, like quinceañeras, or flea markets, or popularly known as pulgas, where vendors set up tables and sell just about anything, or taquerias and restaurants with live mariachi performances. Also, that my rural town of Elsa, population of only 7,000, 4,000 smaller than Hanover, is home to Valente Rodriguez, or more popularly known as Ernie, from the Latino comedy series George Lopez.
Hey, I just wanted to welcome you to Powers Brothers. Yeah. And, if you have any questions, just ask me, because I'm a team leader.
Team leader, that's impressive. I bet they don't just give that title to anyone.
Chale, there's only 12 of us here.
But don't just take my word on the RGV. Listen to fellow residents.
Hi, I'm Brandon Guzman. This is my twin brother, Anthony Guzman, and we're from South Texas. South Texas, as in an area known as the Rio Grande Valle, and it's between the immigration checkpoint Las Falfurrias and then the Mexican border. Growing up in the valley is probably knowing that everyone is very similar to us, at least in background. For the most part, I think almost everyone I encountered was of Mexican descent or from Mexico originally, so everyone understood what we were all going through. There wasn't really issues of racism or external racism onto us or to each other, but I did like that we had a group culture that we could all bond over, because we all knew what each other's lives had been, or we all understood how we got to where we are now.
The valley is such a unique region that it makes sense that it's so different from the rest of Texas and Mexico. The valley is its own little community, where northern Texans view the valley as basically Mexico, and Mexicans view the valley as gringos and not true Mexicanos. So the valley is in this strange limbo. This topic was even further evaluated by a queer Chicana feminist writer, Gloria Anzaldúa, who grew up in Harlingen, Texas, and explored this idea in her critically acclaimed book, Borderlands, La Frontera.
The valley has its own type of culture that's very much separate from the type of culture that exists in Houston, the type of culture that exists in North Texas, and it's very much kind of its own kind of bubble.
The valley has been a hot topic recently because of the new immigration policies and President Trump's big campaign promise to build a wall along the entire southern border. The valley was all over the news back when ICE began separating children from their families and started holding them in old Walmart buildings turned into cells or camps. They are shining a negative spotlight on the RGV and Mexican identity, along with feeding racist ideas to the public.
They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
Clients at your staff is speaking Spanish to customers when they should be speaking very violent.
Which leads to other Americans expressing the same sentiment.
My guess is they're not documented. So my next call is to ICE to have each one of them kicked out of my country. I don't know why you hate us. Why do you hate us? Because we're Mexicans?
And now they have successfully created a negative connotation around the border.
We're honest people right here. Yeah, racist. Racist? How many people have I raped? How many drugs have I dealt?
Also, they come in and raid their houses, and it's very dangerous. And they're told never to leave their house at night, and during the day, always carry a gun and know how to use it.
These straight up lies are detrimental to the valley's image.
There are many misconceptions about the border, either itself or where it's from. Like, I've gotten many comments here in that a lot of people, when they get to know me and they realize I'm from the border, they just think I am from the Mexican side of the border. Even like other people who grew up near border towns ask me if like there's a wall and if I climbed it.
Some popular stereotypes about the valley. Overall, they're very negative stereotypes. A lot of people think that a lot of crime happens in the valley. I was talking to someone that lives here in Hanover, and she said that she used to live in Brownsville, but every time she would go outside, she'd say she felt very unsafe living there because she felt she was going to get attacked because she was so close to the border.
With that, it's dangerous. I would say I feel a lot safer back there than I do here. I think it's really heavily misconstrued as like this place with constant shootouts and drugs, because I've had multiple people go up to me and be like, so which one of your uncles is a drug lord?
Thanks to these lies, they have been assisting on the growth and strength of internalized racism in the border. People at the border do not want to be seen as Mexican.
And I think internalized racism is not something that is easy to see where I live. It's often like hidden. I think you can only experience it if you grew up there. There is this sort of divide between Americans and everyone else. The way I say Americans is just the way I say learn English and want to be American. They want to have this assimilation towards the US. They encourage to only speak English, to discourage speak Spanish. My father is one example, and he forbade us from going to Mexico for 10 years. And then like this pressure to like assimilate and like learn English completely, be comfortable with it, become the whitest you can, all the ways that matter, which was education, a job, and a career. We could keep our Mexicanness, but as long as it remained in the house, as long as nobody else could see it. I think another thing about internalized racism is like, it's more of like I didn't realize it until now, but like, it's more like slowly been kind of growing within our community, because like you have this divide between like Mexican Americans who can speak Spanish and those who can't, right? But as time goes on, I've noticed that like more and more of my friends or like the people I met would say that their parents never taught them Spanish because they didn't want their kids to grow up with an accent, hence like the success like Anthony said. But the other thing is, as more and more time goes on, people like embrace that like being white, and we're proud of the fact that they didn't know that much Spanish. This internalized racism is kind of slowly growing, not so much as in like actual racism like towards skin color. I wouldn't say like that. I'd be more about like being ashamed of your cultural heritage. Like being a Mexican is being seen as probably one of the worst things to be in this country right now, because it is everything that an American shouldn't be. Job stealing, bad hombre.
This creates a dilemma of Latinidad and whether or not to exclude our Mexican heritage from our identity for the sake of fitting in.
Excluding those people who actually came from Mexico and would just naturally identify as Mexicans, I think people who come like from a young age up to older, I hear a lot of like, I'm Mexican American. Identify on the border is mostly Mexican American, excluding those who come like immigrate straight from Mexico. I'm talking mostly about the young generations, and I also identify as Mexican American. In a further vein, like there's like these like usually these three terms that I think have been like growing popular. There's like Chicano, Tejano, and then like Mexican American. And then from what I felt towards like towards others and what others felt toward me, and this is just like a young age growing up there, that Tejano didn't or Chicano didn't really apply to us. We were of our own group that often sometimes went nameless, and we just used Mexican American when like we had to come up with the label, just because there was this difference between the Mexican Americans right next to the border and then the Mexican Americans or the Tejanos that were in the rest of Texas. And also one of the big important factors I think of growing up in like a border town is that I never had to explain my identity to anyone. People just asked, do you speak Spanish? And I said yes, and that was the whole conversation. There was never these issues of like, how can you justify your identity, or how authentic of a Latino or Mexican are you? And it didn't happen to me until I came to Dartmouth, and I realized that like identity is a bigger issue than I thought it was. And after like a year of thinking about this and meeting like actual Mexicans or going back to Mexico and talking to international students here, I realized that I mostly just identify as Mexican American because that's who I am, that's how I was raised.
A lot of people in the valley have trouble identifying, not only because of the homogenous population and the lack of attention towards our Latinidad since everyone is pretty much the same, but also because of this bigotry and whether or not we choose to rise above or erase our culture.